more than you see a ceiling or than you see a floor. Now, historically, lighting design was done by engineers, and that's not a criticism of engineers, but this is a reason that I've got a job, is that a lot of lighting engineering is about putting a luminance level on a task surface. It's, oh, I'll get 300 or 500 lux on the desk. As long as you've got that, it's fine. But you could be working in a cave and you could have that light level on your desk, and if you were drawing or writing or typing, you'd have enough light to see and do the task. But pretty quickly you'd become quite disenchanted with your environment because you're living in a cave. And again, as I said, that's the reason that I've got a job, because there's much more to the lit environment than just numbers on a task plane. It's about the environment and the space. So I guess what I'm saying is ceiling brightness, or light on the ceiling and light on the verticals, is very important to contributing to a light feeling space. I remember that the feeling is a perception. It's an emotive response, not a numerical measured response. The concept of reflection. Light doesn't travel around corners. It's a straight emitting radiation, but what it can be is reflected. So this Kimball in America, very famous gallery, is one of the tools that we use is reflection. And that is why I say we kind of go hand in hand with interior design and architecture, because the finishes that they choose will have a massive impact on the amount of reflected light in a space. So thinking about light reflections, and I don't mean mirrors, I mean actual light bouncing off a finish or a surface, is very, very important for the overall lit environment of a space. Color is massively important. Colored light can be a bit of a Marmite thing, but it has influences on our mood. Very often colored light is used in facade lighting or hospitality, bars, restaurants, spas, wellness facilities. It has a massive impact on our mood, and certain colors do certain things, other colors do other things, and some are desirable responses you want and some are undesirable responses. So it's just to be mindful of color, and that's color of light, but it's also color of finish as well, because one of the other things we need to do is think about the light temperature that we use, the color temperature, relative to the finishes of the environment and the space. I've just sort of talked about that, but surface finish and reflectance is absolutely critical. Although it's nothing to do with a light fitting, it's everything to do with lighting. If you paint an interior of a space black, but you want it to feel bright and airy, that's physically unachievable. You can throw as much light as you want onto a black wall and it's never going to appear bright. So this is an interesting relationship with light and finish, surface finish. They're intrinsically linked. And one of our jobs is to work with the architects and interior designers to look at the finishes and the materials palettes that we're using, advise on it, influence it, help, but also then use it as a driver for the luminaires that we're specifying and the light techniques that we're specifying. If the architect is or interior designer is absolutely dead set on having a black ceiling, they won't be dissuaded, or indeed it's appropriate because it's a bar or a restaurant or something where you really want a moody environment. There's no point in putting light on it. So as much of our job is about designing what we do want to light, but also elements of what we don't want to light as well. So it's just the kind of generic sort of comment that the surface finishes are critical to the feel and the perception of the space, and they should be selected appropriately depending on how you want the space to feel. If you want an intimate restaurant, you want dark finishes potentially. If you want an office with good levels of uniform light, you want light finishes, because light will reflect and bounce around in that space and then contribute to a brighter feeling space and better uniformity. Texture is an interesting one. So this comes back to what I was saying about celebrating architecture and materiality, where you have interesting rough textures. Light is a wonderful tool for revealing texture, but you need to do it in a judicious way. So if you've got a really lovely brick wall, you've got a faceted surface, use light to reveal that if you want. The converse is true. So when you put light onto a surface, it reveals texture. If you don't want texture to be revealed, don't put light on it, because we've all seen plastered, rendered walls that are imperfect. It may not be possible to get a perfect finish because the surface may be impossible to plaster perfectly. But if you put light on that, those imperfections are going to be highlighted. So it's really important to understand the interior design and the architectural aspiration for finishes and texture. Layering of light. I think this is German Gymnasium in London, in King's Cross. It's a lovely, lovely environment to be in. But layering of light for visual interest is something that lighting designers do all the time, particularly in hospitality environments. And when I say layering, I mean physical levels and layers of light. So you've got uplighting to architectural beams, you've got highlights to architectural details at high, you've got wall mounted luminaires local to booths, you've got high level spotlighting, which provides downward ambient lighting to the general environ of the restaurant. You've got vertical illumination behind the bars. You've got low-level integrated lighting to the bar countertop and the kick detail. You've also got circular diffuse wall-mounted, booth mounted and bar-mounted luminaires. In terms of layers of light, and you've got handrail lighting to the stairs. In terms of layers of light, you know, there's 6, 7, 8 layers of light going on here, which contributes to a really diverse and interesting space, but it also allows you to create different moods and environments and feelings by dimming, tuning, switching between those layers of light. It's kind of what I was saying about context. The imagery is a little bit pixelated. I've tried to keep it quite low res because we're on screen, but the context of a project is really important. Well, the context of anything is really important. The context of a project is really, really important, because in a residential environment, you may want very, very low levels of light, depending on what your client wants, or you may want very, very higher levels of light, depending on what your client wants. But what you're doing in a space, the context of how the space is going to be used, is very, very important to understand to allow you to design effectively, I guess is what I'm saying with this slide. Again, color temperature, how warm or cool a white light source feels is really, really critical, not just on finish, but also on mood and actually on daylight as well. So generally, as humans, we welcome warm white light in a sort of residential calming environment. It has a calming response on us. In bars, hospitalities, resi, hotel, warm white light is pretty much standard. But there's degrees of warm white light. There's sort of 2,700 Kelvin kind of standard, but you can get even warmer to 2,400 if you want that really sort of gentle orange glow. That kind of links mentally to the caveman mentality of fire, but it also links to our historical relationship with tungsten, because when tungsten dims, the light bulb historically we used, when it dims, it gets warmer. So you've got this really beautiful relationship between a 2700 Kelvin light bulb, but dimming to 2400, 2200, and getting almost orangey red when it's at really low output. That elicits a certain response in us in certain environments. Now, the flip side is true when you're in a productive environment, such as the workplace, or there is daylight present, because daylight is a very, very cold light source during the day in the peak daylight hours. So if you have loads of daylight in a space and you use a warm white artificial light source, those two will clash, but it will make the warm white look muddy and brown, and it's all linked about context and how a space is going to be used. I think the other critical thing with temperature, light temperature, is it does have an impact on melatonin levels. So cooler white light sources tend to suppress melatonin more than warm white light sources. So if you want people to stay awake, you should use a cooler light source. If you want a more relaxed, calming environment, use warmer. Scale appropriate. Warehouses, massively high buildings, high level lighting has a feel to it. We've all been in a DIY shop, store, where everything's 20 meters up in the air. It feels like a warehouse because it is a warehouse. You don't want that scale if you're dining. You want more intimate, low-level lighting, things that are close to you, tangible around you. It taps into that sort of campfire mentality. Insert section sketch, obviously forgot to do that, apologies. But this goes back to scale. Human scale is scaling things appropriately for us, for humans. You know, the average human is about 1.7 meters high. We need to understand what that is relative to the scale of the luminaires, the scale of the light fitting that we're using. And that's not just scale of the actual fitting, but that's the mounting height as well, because they feel very differently to have different heights. Touched upon this already, complementing the materials with color, temperature and techniques. So if an environment's got a lot of timber, a lot of warm timber, it pushes you towards a warm light source. If you're lighting a diamond or a jewelry display with a lot of silver in it, it pushes you towards a cooler light source. So understanding that is quite important for design. Facial modeling is another big one, because this is quite an interesting diagram. Facial modeling is absolutely critical in certain environments. Teams calls, for one, which we're all doing all day now, and changing rooms in fashion stores, boutiques. Strong light from the front. Sort of, we've all seen the kind of traditional theatre makeup mirrors with lots of light bulbs around it. It's great for modelling. You can see the face very clearly, and the shadowing is very low. Strong light from above is pretty much a disaster if you want good facial modelling, because it catches your eyebrows, gives you 6 o'clock shadow, you look terrible. If you're trying to do somebody's makeup in that context, the lighting design has failed. And also strong light from other directions creates dramatic effects, which you might want. If you're lighting a theatrical space or you're lighting in a bar, you might want that strong modeling. But facial modeling is very critical, and depending on the source, whether it's diffuse, it's got a diffuser, or it's a strong point source, is different techniques and tools that we use to model things differently. Functional lighting, you've got to put task lighting where it's appropriate for the task taking place. So this is more from a kind of commercial office environment or commercial workplace environment, I should say. You need enough light to do the job. That's all I'm saying. Glare, I kind of touched upon earlier. We've got to be really very careful of glare in various different environments, but we've all been in retail or restaurant where there's a poorly aimed spotlight. The general rule of thumb is not to focus anything more than 30 degrees from the vertical. That is a ballpark safe zone. If you're focusing spotlights at 45 degrees, you're going to cause glare. There's different types of glare. Some are more serious than others, but they can lead on to migraines and unpleasantness as well. It's just not creating a really nicely controlled environment. And contrast versus uniformity. So again, I've sort of mentioned this earlier. What kind of space do you want to create? If you want to create a very uniform space like an office, you need good levels of uniform light. You need diffuse light. You need regular space fittings. If you want a contrasting, moody environment, you might want that in a restaurant. You use narrow beam pin spotting on tables. You use accent lighting, but the finishes change. Everything changes. So it's about the context and the kind of space you're trying to create. An architectural integration, you know, you can use really ugly light fittings. I mean, ugly light fittings aren't always very pretty. Architectural ones are definitely not. But can you hide them within details within the architecture to create really, really high quality feeling environments for low equipment costs? And then the architecture, highlighting architectural details. That's always something we look to do as well when there's spaces with something really special that you want to highlight. Light is a wonderful tool for highlighting these sorts of environments. And daylight is a wonderful light source. We welcome it as humans in our environment, but it has to be controlled. Now you can model all this and predict how a scheme is going to perform very, very accurately, but it's just that the fact that uncontrolled daylight can be really, really problematic in a building, but controlled daylight can be beautiful, wonderful, and reduce energy consumption and carbon. Okay, I'm conscious of time. One final slide, sorry, is what you don't like is sometimes just as important as what you do. So as designers, we have to be very judicious about what we do and don't like. Shadows and darkness are not something to be afraid of in the environment. Contextually, you have to be very careful. In public safety and in public realm lighting, you have to be very careful. But in architecture and design, we shouldn't be scared of darkness, or we shouldn't be scared of shadows. Uniform blanket lighting is pretty boring. I'm conscious of time. I'm going to try and get done in 5 minutes, so you can fire all your questions at me and machine gun me, and I'll do my best to answer them. Just a few quick slides on lighting specific techniques and things to think about. There's just 8 slides, so I'll rattle through these. One of the things you do is downlighting. They're a great functionally efficient way of lighting a space. Different types of fittings: trimless, trimmed, recessed, adjustable, surface mounted. You've got to think about all this kind of stuff, how much light comes out of it, the beam angle. If it's a narrow beam, it's going to create a pool of light, very dramatic effect, poor uniformity, but you might want that for a restaurant. You won't want that in an office, for example. Where are you putting the drivers? Are they remote? Are they integrated into a fitting? All this kind of stuff. Linear lighting could be continuous, could be individual modules, very good for uniformity. You've got to think about uplighting, downlighting. Is it recessed? Is it suspended? The diffusion method, is it a louver fitting, or is it cellular with reflectors, or is it diffuse with microprismatic diffusers, opal? Different efficiencies versus different facial modeling characteristics. Luminous ceilings, sort of backlighting, looks great if you want a diffuse, very, very, very uniform environment, not maybe suitable for a gallery for really individual pieces and things you want to highlight. You need a large void depth. That sometimes they can be quite inefficient. They're very costly. Track and spot is the kind of preserve of retail lighting. It's very good for punching light onto products or artifacts and galleries. You've got to think about, similarly with downlight, it's sort of an adjustable, focusable downlight basically. So you've got to think of all the things that you think about with that, but then you add in focusability, tilt, and things like that. Track and spot lighting now is kind of, there's a lot of magnetic stuff, so you can pull it out and move it. It's very flexible. You can change reflectors and diffusers to create different feeling environments. very easily, so it's very flexible source. Pendant lighting, I mean, it does what it says on the tin. They're very decorative generally, although some of them do function. They've got to work hand in hand with the interior finishes and the architecture. Just be mindful of solid, spun, reflector pendants, throw everything down. Diffuse glass, glowing pendants, throw light up and down. Two different techniques create vastly different environments. Downlight only, no light on the ceiling, great in certain environments, really poor in other environments. The converse is true as well. So they get specified mainly for how they look, but there is an element of how they perform involved with it as well. Some other techniques we use, sort of wall grazing. I kind of touched upon texture, putting fittings, linear fittings right up against walls and punching light down. Beautiful for picking up textures, but you've got to hide them from source because you don't really want to see light sources, architectural light sources like that. They're not pretty. So you've got to hide them in architectural details. There's a lot of integration that's required. Cove lighting is another one. Very nice way of creating soft, diffuse lighting in a space. You bounce light out off other surfaces. This is exactly playing into what I was talking about the finish and the color and the reflectance value of that cove. If you do that in a black cove, you're not going to get any light out of it. So don't expect a space to have any light in it. And you also think about color casts, because if you bounce white light off a green wall, you're going to get green light back. You're going to get light back with a green tinge to it, I should say. And then sort of uplighting, very dramatic effect. Very beautiful, very good with rhythmic, repetitive elements such as columns or beams. Very good for revealing texture and form. Very nice for trees. Got to be mindful of light pollution and what you're throwing up in the sky as well. Has a very different feeling space if you throw all of your light up than if you come down. But as part of a layered light scheme, it's a really great technique. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there. So those are some of the tools, techniques, bits and pieces that we do. I'm not going to go into current industry trends because they change all the time. I wondered if there are any questions, Dan, or anyone wanted to talk about anything further.
Hey, Tom. Not yet, actually. So if anyone's got any questions, then yeah, please feel free to mention them now. It'd be great to sort of get some feedback and yeah, fire some questions at Tom.
Okay, well, maybe I'll just go through these few slides then, while if anyone's typing or thinking. Yeah. What is the current industry trends? Okay, let's do it. So circadian lighting, it's been around for a while, but light fittings that tune and change color temperature throughout the day. So one light source that isn't a static white is something that goes from warm white to cool white to neutral white and back again. We have light sources that do that from one light source. And you can use that in office environments where humans occupy spaces for a reasonable amount of time is generally the typical space that you use them for, because they're more expensive, they're less efficient than static white luminaires, but you can play around with the perception of a space very well with different color temperatures. So this was a project we did in Leeds a while ago, Leeds Trinity, where the entrance is off the street, and this is kind of what we're talking about with adaptation as well. In the background there, you can see street on the left is daylit, and at night on the right there. So you're coming in off a really bright daylit space in Leeds during the day. Even when it's overcast, it's still bright. You're coming into this low ceiling height condition, and you want to put good levels of light in there, but we've used tunable fittings so that they're 5,000-6,000 K during the day, so it's a very cool white light, so it matches what you've come in from the street off. At night we dim the fittings right down, so the output goes down and everything tunes to warm, because we're trying to encourage people in at night into this space, to encourage footfall and retailers. One of the other things is healthy buildings. Now, this isn't new; it's not been around for a while, but the standard it's been around for a while. It's not new, but the standards are ever increasing and ever changing in terms of the efficiency demands and balancing the efficiency requirements and energy consumption requirements for these for projects with what's best for humans is becoming more and more challenging. So standards are driving efficiencies up. The most efficient way to light a space is with a direct downlight, a direct LED fitting, linear probably. If you put uplight into a space, it really decreases the overall efficiency of the scheme, but it's the best thing to do for humans. So trying to balance these competing things is really, really becoming challenging. LEDs chips are tiny. Everything's getting smaller, and more light is coming out of them. There will be, if we haven't already reached it, a yield point where we don't need any more light out of things, because the more light you try and squeeze out of a smaller light source, the more uncomfortable it is to see, and the more it needs controlling. So the microfication of luminaires is great, but we'll get to a yield point where you can't get any more light out of something that's 5 mil, 6 mil wide, because you just can't look at it. It's too painful. So that with efficiencies and tech moving forward, we're getting much more efficient and lower wattage, lower consumption products, which is bloody brilliant. But I'm just saying there will be a yield point where things can't get any smaller, and we don't need any more light out of them. What we do need is just to drive down the consumption. That's kind of what I was saying, was in applications like museums and stuff like that, and galleries, small stuff is absolutely bloody brilliant. The Internet of Things and the connectivity of lighting is great. It's happening, is moving forward. Things connected to the internet are just increasing exponentially, and light fittings are no different. So more and more light fittings have Bluetooth control built into them now, which allows you to control things very granularly. We could always do that with DALI protocol with control systems, but now it's kind of coming to your fingertips on phones, which presents new opportunities, but also new challenges. And even technologies such as Li-Fi, where you can people are experimenting with passing data through light by microscopic, imperceivable flickers of light from light fittings. Really sort of cutting edge stuff that's being experimented with. Light fittings are kind of everywhere. They're unanimously across built environments. So something like that as a carrier for this tech is quite good because it's everywhere. And then sort of finally, kind of wireless lighting control and home automation, and not just home automation, but commercial automation, and getting things super smart, super intelligent, that you can use your phone to do anything and everything, and the interface between lighting control and tech. And now I really am finished.
Great. Thanks very much, Tom. There's a couple of questions on there now.
Yeah.
So one from Anthony Eastwood. I think there's two questions from him which are linked. The first one: is there a link with tunable white lighting and intensity? And then he's mentioned, secondly, to have an effect on melatonin generation, you would need tunable light at a quite. Oh no.
I think I've got that.
Sorry. My screen went blank there. Yeah.
No, I think I've got that. It's fine. Yeah. So you can control light intensity, i.e. brightness or output, independently from color temperature. So you can have a very, very bright warm white light source, a very, very dim cool neutral white source. You can control those two factors independently with a tunable white luminaire, so you can achieve what you need to achieve with control on that sort of thing. In terms of suppressing melatonin, higher levels of light suppress melatonin more than low levels of light. Cold light suppresses melatonin more than warm light. So there's that interplay and that balance there, and the different things that you can use in your arsenal to create the response, the circadian response that you want. I hope that answers the question. I think hopefully it does.
Right. Another question from Raman. Could you please elaborate on the transition from dark to bright or vice versa, especially in healthcare and lighting of signages?
Okay. So sort of, as I said, our eye is an amazing thing at adapting and changing and tuning. So we need to, as a designer, we need to think about the context and how a space is going to be used. So if you mentioned healthcare, that's quite an interesting one, because you may have 1,000 lux examination room for a patient, but they may walk in off a 200 lux corridor. So there are step changes in illuminance in kind of British standard guides, which are sort of acceptable to the eye and then unacceptable. So in that kind of context, 5 to 1, 200 to 1,000 is too much for the eye. So we'd think about either increasing light levels in the corridor immediately going into the 1,000 lux environment, or if there was a lobby or an intermediary space or a section of corridor, we'd use a middle value. We'd illuminate that to help that. The converse is true in patient bedrooms, for example, where at night you need to sleep, but you need examination lighting as well. But for example, when you're sleeping, you may need to use the toilet in the middle of the night. So we would always design a low level element in a bedroom to allow a patient to switch that on in the middle of the night to get to the toilet without creating a lot of light in a space. So I think hopefully what I'm trying to say is in an environment or a space or a piece of architecture or a public realm, we need to think about every sort of use case that's happening in that space to allow us to design the lit environment appropriately. And it may be that you have two schemes. You have a daylight scheme and a nighttime scheme, and you're not necessarily doubling up on equipment, but using control or tunability or focusing or switching or whatever. You can light for the day where you need much more light, and you can light for night where you need less light. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, great. One more from Paul Eccleshare. For Li-Fi, why would you use light rather than, say, Bluetooth connected to fittings?
Well, the light is about a way of transmitting data. So it's like a Wi-Fi, but it's Li-Fi. So instead of having a Wi-Fi router in the corner of a room, you would use the light fitting to transmit data. But the thing with Li-Fi is it's much, much, much faster than Wi-Fi.
Yeah, right. We're just sort of over the 1 hour mark now. So I think we can probably start to wrap it up. So yeah, on behalf of the committee, I'd just like to say thanks very much for Tom and everyone for joining us at this lunchtime. Appreciate your time and your support. So I know you mentioned you may want to discuss possible opportunities with BDP lighting before we finish.
Yeah, so getting into lighting is there isn't really a clear path. There's like 1 or 2 courses that UK universities offer. There's stuff overseas, but you don't need any kind of qualification to go into lighting, not that we look for. You've got to have a passion and an interest and a curiosity about it. But we don't necessarily need prerequisite qualifications because they don't really exist, or they kind of haven't done until recently. But we're always looking for people who are interested and excited to start working in this field. And we've got studios in London and Manchester. So if people are interested, let's have a chat.
Great. Yeah. So yeah, if there's anyone interested there that would like to possibly go into the lighting design, then yeah, drop drop Tom a message or reach out to us. So yeah, once again, thanks very much to Tom, and thanks everyone for joining us today, this afternoon. So yeah, it's much appreciated.